it up for the working group for comments as well. This initiative was started out of an effort to try to tackle some of the trends that we're confronting as a region, and in particular population decline and its impacts on our municipal budgets and our school budgets. And so as we have tried to do that, we've looked at our infrastructure and realized that we don't even have our basics in place, whether it's high-speed internet or transportation. And so in many ways, this is an effort to try to spur the economy. And transportation is critical for linking to regional economic centers, in this case, New York. And it's a way that we can start to take advantage of advancing technology that allows folks to work remotely. And it certainly is a way to support our third largest industry, being tourism and the arts and culture. And so we know that the economic impact from a rail link would be considerable, and this report starts to go to some steps to underscore that point. In pursuing train connections for the region, for me to see progress, the key ingredients have been cost and timeliness. Those have just been critical factors, and I'm for one, I'm hesitant to wait around for a decade as we try to lay new track. Or pursue options that could be incredibly expensive. And the higher the price tag often means that impacts the likelihood of success. And so, after all, we've seen that, particularly in the Connecticut route, being one of the factors that why we're encountering challenges in that route. And so, with those obstacles, Connecticut has been sluggish in movement, to put it nicely, and so exploring an alternative route in the short term became appealing. So it was with that in mind, about a year ago, it came to my attention, including by folks at this table, that there is in fact existing passenger route going due west from Massachusetts through New York, and there's the potential for connecting to Amtrak line to head south to New York City. And exploring that became incredibly appealing, particularly because of the potential for doing this at a minimal investment and the ability to move rather quickly. And so I just wanted to underscore that was the lead up to then putting language into the budget last year that created this working group and this 6 months of work that we're concluding. And I might just read the sentence that is relevant for that. And in the budget it said, to identify and evaluate the economic and cultural benefits and political, legal, or logistical challenges to the Berkshire and Western Massachusetts regions of the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth as a whole. You can get some nice legislative jargon here in long sentences. As a whole, of establishing direct seasonal weekend passenger rail service between the city of New York and the city of Pittsfield between Memorial Day and Columbus Day weekends, modeled on the Cape Flyer passenger rail. And so we've been clear from the start that we view this as a first step on the path towards more expansive rail coverage and connection year-round between New York and the Berkshires. And so we're here today to release the feasibility study conducted by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation in support of this working group. And we're going to hear some of the details now, but the kind of the high-level points that really jumped out at me is that this report, or the letter relaying the report, says, and I quote, "The working group was able to confirm that a seasonal service appears feasible and could provide benefits to the tourist economy of Berkshire County," end quote. And key to this assessment, as we'll hear, is that there is no additional infrastructure costs for the option selected by this working group. And again, importantly, we're able to talk about a short timeline for potentially seeing a pilot. And in this, the working group has indicated in its cover letter that a pilot would be possible no earlier than the summer of 2019, and I will add, no later than 2020. But before I get too far in that assessment, I would like to introduce Astrid Glenn, who will provide the details. And Astrid is the Department of Transportation Rail and Transit Administrator. She developed the Cape Flyer. She's the former commissioner of the Department of Transportation in New York State. And we literally could not have found a better person to be in charge of this process. And it has been an honor and really a privilege to watch you do your work and do it effectively and seriously and efficiently. And so thank you for that effort.
Thank you. And I also want to thank Amtrak and the consultant team who really made this possible and took a lot of the good ideas and practicalities expressed by the working group and turned it into this report. Now, we have a short PowerPoint. I'm going to stand up, not because it's that interesting, but because I'm near something. This is perhaps the piece that the working group has not seen in detail. You've seen it indirectly, and it is incorporated in the study as you have it in front of you, and as you saw the study over the last week. Amtrak was kind enough to give us a financial estimate for running the service that we outlined to them. And it is an estimate, but Amtrak, as you know, is pretty careful with its estimates, so I feel very good about putting it up here. What they estimated for us was the cost of the option 1A that we discussed, which was basically going Pittsfield, New York City, Pittsfield, Albany. They estimated the price for a full 20 weeks of service consistent with the legislation, although the working group had talked about the possibility that perhaps a mid-late June start might suffice. They estimated ridership based not only on the capacity of the train, but also what their models told them about ridership and some of the information that we had developed on ridership. Capital cost estimates, as the Senator indicated, at this point there is no capital cost necessary for the service as it is understood. Operating cost, the gross cost for what Amtrak would charge us is $421,561. As I said, Amtrak estimates tend to be, not exactly rounded off. They are assuming that based on their normal revenue structure, that the revenue from the 2,600 one-way trips would reduce that by $184,000, and that the net cost for the 20-week service would be some $237,561. So that is for a 20-week weekend service, one train on Friday coming up from New York City, one train on Sunday going back down to New York City. This is the schedule, which was developed after considerable discussion with the working group. What it does is it builds off the existing Amtrak service to Albany, so that what we are asking Amtrak to provide extra, and therefore we would be charged extra, is the continuation of that service to Pittsfield. And you see it's basically mid-afternoon on Friday, and then again mid-afternoon on Sunday coming back. These are the actions that the working group has discussed and that we wanted to sharpen in the report because a lot of discussion has gone into these. These are the actions that would be necessary for the proposed service to go forward. First, there would need to be a source for the operating funds. We have the Amtrak charge that they have outlined to us. We also are cautioning, as the working group has discussed, that there really needs to be some marketing and management effort associated with this service for it to succeed. Rail services do not succeed just because they're nice. It needs management, it needs marketing, it needs a champion. As it says there, the net costs, which are an important factor when you're looking for startup funds, would depend on the season duration and actual ridership. So the possibility of a mid-June start might be something that the sponsors would want to consider. and its actual ridership is certainly a factor that the sponsors would need to keep very, very closely in mind. There was discussion of a pilot and sort of a proof of concept step. And what we wanted to outline, and it's in the report in more detail, is what would it take for a pilot to be pursued? MassDOT and the MBTA have standing policies on pilots, which we used as a reference point because we know them, and they seem reasonable. First, there needs to be a service sponsor identified, somebody who's a champion and also a backstop. And let me go back to the Cape Flyer for a minute. When the Cape Flyer was started, the Regional Transit Authority acted as financial backstop to the service in the first few years.
You mean guarantor?
It provided backup funding.
So it provides a guarantee.
In a way, yeah. We also, any pilot to be successful needs demonstrated support from a wide range of stakeholders. It also needs to start out with very clear understandings of what is success. What is the ridership target? What is the revenue target? How is performance going to be measured and judged? You don't want to start and then start to decide what your definition of success is. You need to establish a very firm time frame as part of that definition of success. How long are you going to give it a try? And in this case, if a pilot were to be pursued, it would be necessary to incorporate the service plan for the pilot into the Section 209 agreement that exists between Amtrak and New York State. That is the agreement by which Amtrak provides the existing service on the Empire Corridor from New York City up to Pittsfield. So it would basically need to be added into that agreement. Under Section 209 is Section 209 of the Passenger Rail Improvement and Infrastructure Act or something like that. You could something like that. You could investment, yes. Okay, service sponsorship, as I mentioned, local leadership is essential. It needs a real champion at the ground level. And then this last mile issue, we spent a lot of time talking about this. When people get off the train, they may have a friend come pick them up, but if they don't, they're going to want to be able to go someplace other than the train station. So it could be rental cars, it could be zip cars, it could be bicycles, it could be shuttles, it could be transit buses. There are many alternatives, but you need to think of it in terms of the entire trip and not just the train trip, because that's going to be an important part of the marketing. So that's where I will leave it. And since I no longer need to see anything, I will sit down.
I mean, what's interesting also is that there were multiple options considered. You know, the initial concept was using existing passenger rail and the potential there. I will just say, because you referenced 1A, 1B could be described quickly as a new train set, an express route coming out of New York City. And while it didn't have any additional capital costs, the operating costs maybe and process would be added some uncertainty.
More complex.
More complex. And then the second would be a spur west of Massachusetts and Connecticut that, again, after the good work of the DOT and your consultants, identified that could be $17 million plus. And so now we start to enter a very different conversation, and not one that we necessarily would give up on the long run, but in terms of meeting the criteria of a very short-term pilot, or one that we can initiate in the short term, it started to maybe be pushed aside, and the working group decided to, given the option to only pursue one and from a pricing standpoint, to select that route in this option that we just heard. So just for background. Good. I think that you basically have covered the next portion of the agenda, which is the next steps. identifying a local service sponsor, and I think in this effort, One Berkshire will be key. One Berkshire, the CEO, Jonathan Butler, intended to be here, but due to a ski accident, is not. He's fine, but he's dealing with that as a result. One Berkshire, the Berkshire Regional Planning Commission, and the Department of Transportation will be key in steps moving forward. The first two in particular, I think, in this service sponsor, my plan for this budget cycle is to pursue funds, particularly for this purpose, to continue to develop what that local transportation option looks like, and developing a marketing plan and going further into the financial plan and implications. And so that's what our plan is in the very short term related to the budget, and what we'll do, I suppose, in the subsequent or the year ahead. At that point, maybe I'll open it up for a discussion on next steps, and hearing anything from the working group in general.
Senator, one thing that we can offer the Regional Planning Commission is when the last Federal Transportation Act was passed, they included a new element on planning for tourism and travel and tourism, with a very nebulous set of what that should entail. So we actually have that in our current planning work program that was adopted last summer. And we're going to do a little bit of research to start to kick off some of the things that we had ticked off when we were talking with your staff about the looking for the funding for next year, to start to get more identification of what happens in the tourism sector here, so that we can maybe have a little bit of a jump start before the fiscal year starts at the state level on some of the things you were talking about. Yeah, I mean, it's just happenstance that we'd already put that in there, and we were starting to work on developing the scope of work when this got drafted, and
It's good planning.
small amount of planning replaces dumb luck.
Serendipity.
Obviously I'm very, very excited about this. I mean, it's 1 year ago tomorrow was the day that Anna and I first had a discussion about this.
Is that right?
Yeah, March 27th of last year.
That's
So
more accurate than I thought.
it's amazing how far we've gone, and thanks to Astrid and her staff and the working group, the tremendous ideas and dedication of the people that have been involved in this, that we've gotten this far. So I'm very, very satisfied, very happy about this. The thing about the implementation, and what Nat mentioned about the grant, there are so many sort of multiple tracks that sort of need to be taken, without any puns about the trains, and essentially I see a sort of a timeline that if there is going to be service starting next summer, basically working back, because the marketing and the advertising and the public relations, whatever sorts of sort of publicity, has to happen a number of months before in order to get a number get people interested in it. Same with Amtrak's marketing efforts. So it would be a tight timeline for 2019, but one that I really think could be done. I just see that with the resources that we have in Berkshire County right now, and the dedication of the elected officials and other people, the business community in particular, who I speak to, who are so excited about this prospect, both in the short term and the long term, that it's really going to be a question of just harnessing all of the enthusiasm and the interest in this, rather than trying to stoke people's interest in it.
And I have to thank you for your ongoing work, because it's been very detailed and very involved in your idea in the first place. Anyone else have any comments they want to make, or questions, or points?
I'll make a comment or two, Senator.
Representative.
Are you surprised by that?
That's great.
No, I just really want to thank you, Senator. You've taken the lead on this in such a big way, and Astrid and this whole group I remember in the first meeting, Astrid, you used the term, this is a working group with an emphasis on working. And that's certainly what has happened with this group, everybody delving in, contributing, bringing the perspective from their own perspective, from the realtors to the last mile to the businesses. And what we've seen roll out is a very methodical study, but a nimble one, right? Government and nimble. Did you notice I put those two things together, which is rare, right? But that's true, is that you were able to get the information together and to be able to make a decision on maybe not what we thought was going to happen at the beginning, but what we think is going to be the best option. And as the senator has said, we don't want to wait 10 years for this. You know, we want this to happen quickly because we see that in the short term, we're going to not only see benefits in the short term, but we're going to learn a lot as we go, which is why we do pockets, right? But this is also just one piece, a very critical piece of a much bigger picture, right? Senator started off with talking about infrastructure and how we're so lacking in very basic infrastructure here in the Berkshires. And we need to be able to build this infrastructure so that the people of the Berkshires have an opportunity to thrive. And so in the short term, next steps, we talked about how we're going to harness the enthusiasm that is already there. Well, we already have a way to do that. We have tourism dollars in Massachusetts. And some years we fund that well, and some years we don't. And I would think that the people of the Berkshires would have an increased motivation to make sure that those tourism funds are well funded in this year's budget, because when One Berkshire has the dollars they need to advertise, where do they advertise? In the New York City market. That's where they put their advertising dollars, because that's when we're bringing, you know, as we like to say, other people's money into the Berkshires. Doing the last mile and the support of the last mile is critically important. And I'm so glad that that was all talked about throughout the whole thing, because it's not going to do many people much good if they're just stuck on the corner of Columbus and North, right? And so we have some work to do around that, and I can never get to a meeting on transportation without including the Columbus Avenue garage. Needs to be included in this. This is part of the puzzle. And then certainly, so those are the short-term things. In the long term, of course, we want to grow the flyer, right? I mean, we don't want to see this end with one trip, round one trip. We want to see this as part of a whole rail study for the Berkshires, including East-West Rail. And we want to be able to see not just tourists move in and out of the Berkshires. We want to see people who live here go use the rail to work outside of the Berkshires, and vice versa. It should be part of our whole plan. So thank you very much for the great work that you've done, and you know, you have full support of the House delegation in trying to get that equipment passed. I know it's not easy to get those House members to cooperate.
And you bring up an interesting point that has been talked about at various points with this group, which is were there other opportunities along that route between the Albany Rensselaer Station and Pittsfield, and the benefits of having a stop in, say, a West Stockbridge for capturing more of the South County group and getting closer to that line, because it does seem that there might be a line that at a certain point folks will go to Wassaic, but there is an effort to try to continue to keep an eye on the next steps that would get us towards covering more and more people. And a big piece that has been a part of this is just that, and this points to another benefit to this versus a Wassaic, which is when people get off at the station, they'll be in the Berkshires, hopefully with a new infrastructure of local transportation options, be it rental cars, on-demand shuttles to local hotels and cultural events, and on and on, and of course the BRTA. Good. So we'll just keep on going down the line, I guess. For anyone, any other comments you all want?
I'll just highlight the same thing that everyone has. As a railroad operator, I can tell you that I think the easiest part of this whole project at this point will be operating the train. But I think really the hardest is getting people to it and that last mile. And I can't stress enough that I think Berkshire County, we heard you. We know that passenger rail is is of interest out here. We've provided the county now with a workable, cost-effective solution, and now let's get together and try to use it. And how do we expand on that? There's plenty of options, whatever they may be. We've discussed some of them. But the fact of the matter is, at this point, now that we have the physical train at some point, what can we do to get people on it? What can we do to get people to know about it? And really that last mile. I can't stress that enough. I think that's so, the train will come and go. The key is, how do we make that effective and improve upon it?
Adam, let's make one more point. Adam mentioned the station in West Stockbridge as a possible long-term option, and also the group talked about, although just very quickly, the possibility of a train station in Chatham, New York, and that again is not something that the state of Massachusetts is going to be involved with, but it does point to, hopefully at some point in the future, getting New York on board and getting them interested in this service, and perhaps even at some point contributing in some way, particularly if there is going to be a shortcut that is going to be built at some time, whether it's $17 million or whatever. I personally see that if there is going to be a long-range plan for the Berkshire Flyer, I see that as being very much part of it. But clearly, it's a significant expense, and having New York shoulder some of that would be a real benefit and would help the process move forward. But I just wanted to bring that up.
Great.
I think we're done.
Okay, well then this is perfect. This is our intention today was to release and announce the reports and its findings, and I think we've done that.
Yeah.
So I just want to close by thanking you again, Astrid, and the Governor and Secretary Pollack for their continued involvement and encouragement. And thank you to everyone on this working group and the serious work that has taken place. We haven't talked about the whole range of research that various groups along here have contributed. And I do think it's also incredibly important to just underscore that we now, in a short amount of time, have a path for the budget. We have a path for a pilot, we hope, in the short term. I want to thank, by the way, Caroline and Amtrak for their continued engagement on this, and we look forward to working with you closely on this moving forward. So we'll continue to keep our eyes on the full potential to New York and our eyes on the full potential of East-West Rail. And it's an exciting step forward. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And one last thing.
The
last word.
The last word. I'm not the last word. But I brought some sparkling cider. I was going to bring some champagne, but I was sternly admonished by Mass DOT. And I have, I'm still, I could barely sit down. That's how sternly admonished I was. But I do have sparkling cider.
Don't throw me under the bus.
Thank you all. That was
Thank you.
wonderful.